Kind of wanted to tell, I know we've got a lot of people that are here on the Article 5 issue, and so kind of tell you where we're at today and then kind of the process we're going through legislatively. We've got a few other things we're going to hear before we get to the Article 5 presentation. So if you'll just kind of be patient with us on that, it'll probably take us about an hour to get through the other charges, the other things on the agenda before. So if you need to leave or go do something, it's a good time to do that. Also, just want to say, I know we've got a lot of people here for that, and probably several hundred. Mentioned the overflow rooms. First off, we just really want to thank you for being here. This is kind of a labor of love for all of us, being in the legislature, and we know you traveling here today on the Article 5 issue is really a labor of love for you. So I just want you to know that we appreciate your participation in the process. It does our heart tremendously good when people participate at this level, and so thank you for doing that. As for what will happen today, the legislature, as you know, is not actually in session, and at the end of each session, regular session, the Speaker always gives us charges, things to study and work on during the interim. And today is the hearing that we'll be addressing the charges that the Speaker has specifically given us. Article 5 comes under the jurisdiction of this committee, and although there is not a specific charge from the Speaker with regard to it, since it is of such high interest to so many people, as evidenced by your presence today, we're going to go ahead and have an update on that as well. Now, because this isn't a typical legislative hearing where bills have been filed, there's no public testimony. In other words, the only testimony that will be here today is just that which has been invited to be to give a presentation. We do that because there's really no bills to discuss before us. What I want everybody to be sure they understand is this, that when the legislature convenes this next January, without any question, there will be bills filed on Article 5 issues and all the different approaches to that. And I want you to know that that we will give prompt hearings to those as those bills are filed, and that we'll take public testimony at those, and that anyone that from anywhere that wants to testify will be allowed to. So there'll be a lot of time and a lot of opportunity for public participation, for your participation, when those bills are actually up before the House and before the committee. For today, what we're trying to do is really deal with the charges, the assignments that the Speaker gave us to work on as a committee, and then also just get an update on where the Article 5 process has gone since the time that we adjourned. All the members here have had a buku of testimony and information and presentations and briefings and everything else on the Article 5 issue, and they know it, and they know all the different approaches to it. And so we didn't want to delve into that today. We just wanted to get an update on what's happened since we adjourned. One of those things is that Governor Abbott has become very involved in the process and has written a book which probably some of you have read. I would recommend it to you. It's really a very, very good piece of work, and we have invited the governor's office to be here today to just speak on that on Article 5 as well. And then we have one invited testimony in addition to that. So we will now resume our invited testimony, and just the next issue we'll be addressing is an update on Article 5. And just to remind everybody, again, we're not taking, typically at a legislative hearing during session, you can register and you can testify on any issue. And the chair will always go through and go through that long list. In the interim, it's different. It's not common for us to take public testimony because we don't really have bills before us. We have issues we're kind of studying to help us get prepped up and ready for the session, which will kick off in a few months. And so again today, if we are so pleased that so many came down for this issue, and as I said earlier, it really warms our heart to do that, to see you here, because it is a labor of love for all of us, for you and us as well. I also just want to mention again that when bills are filed, everyone that's here today is welcomed and encouraged to come back and participate. You can testify on the bills at that time. I would expect there will be a number of bills dealing with Article 5 and other issues of interest. And you will, if you register that day, you will be allowed to testify, and we will want you to testify. So don't think the fact that we're just doing just invited testimony today reflects in any way upon the legislature's interest level in this issue or in the fact of whether or not we want your testimony. We do want your testimony. It's just at this point of the process, the legislative process during the interim, is not the time that we would take public testimony on this issue. Now, the other thing that we've tried to do today is to all the members of the House, frankly, but particularly the members of this committee, heard a lot of testimony, looked at a lot of bills, and did a lot of study on Article 5 during the last regular session. But that was over a year ago. And so what we're hoping to hear today is an update of just kind of what's happened since then. There's three big issues. The legislature, there were three big kind of last time approaches to this. There was the compact, and then there was the BBA and the Convention of States. And my guess is that those will have bills filed in all of those areas this next time. There may be a new area that someone comes up with, or maybe one has gone away. I don't know. But for today, we're just going to kind of address Article 5 globally. Now, if you recall, we mentioned this earlier too, after the session concluded, Governor Greg Abbott came out with a book, Broken but Unbowed. And again, if you hadn't read it already, I would encourage you to. I have. And I'll tell you, it's a very well thought out treatise. It was also kind of fun getting to kind of learn a little bit more about Governor Abbott and just him personally. But it is a very well written treatise, and it's got all the lawyerly stuff in it that you need to really understand the federal issues. But it's written in a way that's very very easy to understand. And so I would just encourage you to do it. But it discusses the importance of rebalancing state and federal power through the use of Article 5. We have invited Governor Abbott's office to come to our committee today to give us an update. Again, we'll also be receiving an update on resolutions around the country in a minute. We're not here to discuss the merits of different Article 5 resolutions. Again, there'll be many of opportunities to do that with ample opportunity for public testimony. We're just receiving an update today from what has happened since we adjourned. Sonny died a year ago, May. With that, let me call Deputy General Counsel Andy Oldham to the table. Andy, there you are. Chair recognizes Andy Oldham, and if you would please, just for the record, state your name and who you're here to represent. Folks, I know it sounds dumb that we do that after we've already introduced somebody, said where they're from, but it's just part of the deal, okay? So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Andrew Oldham on behalf of the Office of the Governor. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to come and to address this incredibly important issue with you all today. Chairman King, as you already mentioned, the committee is already well versed in the issue of Article 5. Last session, after all of those hours of testimony on multiple sides of this issue, the committee passed out 3 different resolutions, HJR 77 by Representative Miller, HJR 78 and 79 by Representative Workman. And 2 of those resolutions ultimately passed the House. So given that the committee has already heard all of that, given that the House has already adopted those 2 resolutions, I'm going to keep my testimony brief, and I'd like to address 3 big issues today. First, I want to talk a little bit about why Governor Abbott has called for an Article 5 Convention of States. In short, Washington, D.C. is broken. And it's broken in a fundamental and particular way. The federal government has abandoned, largely, the Constitution of the United States, and in doing so has jeopardized the rule of law. The framers designed our country as a constitutional republic. It's a republic in the sense that we get to elect our federal leaders and our federal lawmakers. and it should be a constitutional republic, in the sense that the leaders that we send to Washington to make the laws under which you and I are governed should be constrained by the United States Constitution. But today, that system is fundamentally broken. Instead of executing laws that are made by Congress, modern-day conceptions of presidential power allow our chief executive to make law using, quote, only a pen and a phone. Our Supreme Court seems just as comfortable making up rights that have no bearing in the Constitution as it is ignoring those that are expressly and explicitly guaranteed by the text of that document. And our Congress seems to do virtually nothing, but what it does do is incredibly expensive and often at odds with the text and architecture of the Constitution. These are profound concerns that undermine public confidence in government and threaten the very fabric of our constitutional republic. And in Governor Abbott's view, it is time for the states to lead where Washington has failed, and that starts with restoring the Constitution and the rule of law. Second, I would like to address what Governor Abbott would like to see accomplished in an Article 5 Convention of States. In January of this year, as Chairman King mentioned, the governor published a white paper called the Texas Plan. The Texas Plan is both modeled after and named in accordance with previous state plans that gave birth to our Constitution. For example, when the framers met in the summer of 1789 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, one of the questions that they had to decide upon was how were they going to structure the United States Congress. And in deciding that question, they heard the Virginia Plan, which was the large state plan that called for proportional representation in the national legislature. They heard the New Jersey Plan, which was the small state plan, the one state, one vote plan. And they ultimately decided upon the Connecticut Compromise, which is how we have a bicameral national legislature today. Those states and their plans led the way in forming our Constitution 227 years ago. And now, it's Texas's turn to lead the way in restoring it. The Texas Plan consists of 9 proposed amendments that the governor would like to see come from a convention of states. 2 of those amendments would restore the rule of law to the executive branch. 2 would rein in the United States Congress. 2 would make the United States Supreme Court accountable to the states and to the people. And 3 would restore to the states some of the power that had been deprived it by that overreaching federal government. These amendments would not solve all of our problems. Of course, no government plan and no government program will ever do that. But the goal of the Texas Plan is more modest. It provides a much-needed starting point for states to put the Constitution back into a constitutional republic. Third and finally, the point I'd like to address is some of the public reaction to the governor's call for an Article 5 Convention of States and his publication of the Texas Plan. This is not just an idea. It is a movement. It is an incredibly powerful one that is supported by an enormous and broad grassroots campaign. If you just look around this room and just look around the building, hundreds of Texans have taken time away from their jobs, time away from their families. Some have traveled a great distance to come to the people's capital and to show their support for this movement. And that should be unsurprising, because Americans generally, and Texans in particular, understand that the federal government's abandonment of the rule of law portends dangerous consequences for individual liberty, and folks are hungry to rein in a federal government that has lost its way. Of course, it's also important to recognize that Article 5 has its skeptics. Some worry about runaway conventions, others worry about uncontrollable delegates, some worry about radical changes to the document. And it's crucial that we take these concerns seriously and that we treat skeptics and critics with the utmost respect. And although we don't have time to deal with all of the governor's responses to these criticisms today, I would like to highlight 2. The first comes from the Constitution itself. Under Article 5, a convention of states cannot meet to do anything until 34 states, that is 2/3 of the United States, agree to do so. And even after a convention of states, no proposal from the convention of states can be ratified without 38 votes, 38 states voting for it. These are enormous supermajority requirements, and they are designed, the framers' vision in adopting them in the original Constitution was to weed out radical and fringe or runaway ideas and to allow through only those amendments that have broad, wide-ranging support. If we've gotten to the point in this country that we cannot count on 13 states to block an improvident, or as some would say, runaway proposal, then things are even worse than we originally thought. Now, Article 5 and the text of the Constitution itself provides a large answer to concerns and criticisms of this movement, but it doesn't provide the total answer, because a second response falls to this committee and to the Texas legislature. Last session, both this committee and the full House passed House Bill 1110 by Chairman King, which addresses the qualifications, duties, and limitations on any Texas delegates that ever go to an Article 5 convention. And in the governor's view, the legislature should pass something like that, if not that, again this session. And that is because an Article 5 convention could happen at any time, with Texas's vote or without it. And, perhaps crucially for this particular discussion, a bill like that goes a long way to addressing concerns about runaway conventions and uncontrollable delegates. Again, thank you very much for inviting the governor's office to testify today. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Members, any questions?
I've got some. Andrew, thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
There we go. Thank you for being here, Andrew. What has been the response from other governors around the country to Governor Abbott's initiative?
The response has been, I think, overwhelmingly positive. It is in multiple different ways. We've seen concrete proposals and adoptions in movement in the Article 5 space across the country. And more generally, there's been an enormous amount of interest and discussion of these issues. Right? There are an enormous number of people in this country who I think recognize and agree across a wide range of issues that things in Washington are broken. And we may not agree, all of us, on the proposals and the pathway forward. But really, at the end of the day, the choice is to continue doing what we're doing and continue to suffer under a broken system, or to try something, to try to do something. And in the governor's view, and I think this has gotten widespread traction, the best place to start in coming up with that solution is the Constitution itself. Because at the end of the day, we really either believe in what the framers of that Constitution gave us, or we don't. And those men foresaw that this day would come, and they gave us a document that shows us a pathway forward. And I think that message has really garnered a lot of traction.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to point out, you talked about depending on 13 states to keep some road built. It's actually 13 out of 99 bodies, because you've got 99 legislators, and it'll take both houses of the legislation to pass, ratify an amendment. So it's really 13 out of 99 that it's all it takes really to block it.
Yes, sir. That's a good point, Representative Workman. It would obviously require bicameral concurrence.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Anderson?
Good to see you, Andy.
Thank you,
Appreciate
sir.
being here. The Texas Public Policy Foundation had an event that they had states come in. Do you happen to know how many states were represented at that meeting?
I do not know. I know it was overwhelming.
I believe it was at minimum about 20 states, I believe. And that was very encouraging.
Is your mic on? We can't hear you.
Yes, it is. Sorry about that. The question was that Texas Public Policy Foundation had an event a few months ago, and they had representatives from different states came in to visit about this issue. I believe there was about 20 states were represented there, which was very encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes,
just
sir.
want to make that comment, so thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good. Tim?
Appreciate you being here and the testimony. Just a curious question. When you all were in your formulation process of this, the fact that today there's already a standing call for an Article 5 that Texas weighed in a long time ago, there's just some discussion whether or not that's binding today or not. What is the governor's assessment? What is your legal assessment of that? I think would benefit all of us to understand that, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir. As I recall, and based on the research that we've done, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 or 13 standing calls that the legislature, dating back to 1899 to the present, have outstanding. And I think that the well-settled view as to what those mean is that they remain in operation until they are repealed. Now, some have time limits built into them, and others don't. And so you really have to go through each one of them and analyze the text of each of them to understand whether and to what extent they continue to operate as a call for a convention. But the important piece to realize is a federal matter, and as to what the United States Constitution says, is that this is a state prerogative. It is vested in the state legislature. And so this body is the one that has to take the responsibility and for making the determination as to when to have one and exactly what the contours of the convention will be. And that cuts both ways, right, in terms of the 1899 one that doesn't have limits embedded in it versus ones that, if we went back to, say, HJR 77, from last session that has very strict issue-limited confines to it.
Very good. Thank you, Andy.
And I think one of the things we need to talk about and think through very carefully is if the Texas legislature passes some resolutions on Article 5 this time, we need to, subsequent to that, but during the same session, we need to probably repeal or think about repealing those that are out there, because I think it's going to get kind of confusing which has precedent, which is do you have conflicting law? I know it's generally the rule is whichever passed last, but also I think one of the things that's been discussed is putting a time limit on what we might pass this time, because I don't think it's good legislation to have something standing on the books that was passed in 1898 when there was a lot of different things going on still alive today.
That is certainly the more modern approach is to put time
so I
limits.
think we probably need to think about that, and maybe you can kind of help us think about the right way to do that. I think it needs to happen subsequent to whatever we do if we do something, and I hope we will.
Yes, sir. It obviously falls to the legislature, but we'd be delighted to.
Good.
Yeah, very good.
And members, any? Travis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Oldham, I appreciate your testimony. I'm sorry I wasn't able to catch all of it, and if this was addressed, you can tell me, go back and watch the movie. But this committee under Chairman King's leadership heard a lot of testimony. There were conflicting views of how Article 5 should be used, and in fact, in some significant group, should not be used because of the concerns of I'll think of the common expression is of a runaway convention. In your research work with the governor, how's the governor come to reconcile those concerns? Because the testimony we've heard those were legitimate concerns. They were sincere beliefs that formed. There is some basis to think about that. How does the governor reconcile that into his construct of what an Article 5 convention should look like?
Yes, sir. And the governor's view on this is that the criticisms absolutely must be taken seriously. But the governor also believes very strongly that there are the Constitution itself, the original public understanding of the Constitution itself, and the materials that have come after the Constitution's enactment provide a complete and overwhelming answer to those concerns. To take the Constitution itself, the supermajority requirements that are embedded in Article 5 provide a large part of the refutation to the concerns about a runaway convention. Because if you imagine whatever the hypothetical runaway proposal would be that would come out of a convention that had already been called by a supermajority of the states, of course it doesn't become the law of the United States unless and until it's ratified by 38 states. So it's very difficult to come up with a hypothetical runaway proposal that we couldn't get 13 states to stop. And as Representative Workman pointed out, you actually need both houses in those 13 states. So it's actually quite a strong supermajority requirement embedded in Article 5. Beyond that, we also have the issue of the power of the legislatures, all of us, all of you, and all of us in the United States, to limit the conventions in scope, so that they're not what we call plenipotentiary or general powered conventions, but they're issue limited in scope. There are also the power of the legislature to limit the commissions of the delegates who go, and to give instructions to the delegates that go. That's a well-settled practice that existed even at the original convention in Philadelphia in 1789. And you put all of that together, and there is, I think, an overwhelming case to be made that whatever risk there is in the Article 5 convention is dramatically outweighed by the benefit. And I think in summarizing all of that, I cannot do it and say it any better than the late and great Justice Antonin Scalia did. And if I might, with your indulgence, I'll read a very short passage from him. This is from when he was a lowly law professor at the University of Chicago in 1789, and he said the following: "I've talked about the need for a convention because somehow the federal legislature has gotten out of our control, and there's nothing we can do about it. One can say the same thing about the federal judiciary. And that is one reason I'm willing to take the chance in having a convention, despite some doubts that now exist. So he recognizes the doubts. I'm not sure how much longer we have. I'm not sure how long people can accommodate to directives from a legislature that it feels is no longer responsive, and to directives from a life-tenured judiciary that was never meant to be responsive, without ultimately losing its will to control its own destiny. And that was in 1789. So I think that the argument from Governor Abbott is that those concerns apply a fortiori today.
All right. And that does kind of make you miss Justice Scalia.
Yes, sir.
But I really do appreciate your thoughts on this. I look forward to working with it. But, several people in our district, this is an issue in my 3 counties in East Texas does come up, and people have great interest. And do I believe that the Article 5 is the constitutional equivalent of the easy button on the commercial? No. And it shouldn't be. It should be difficult to pass laws. And it should be easier, Chairman Workman, as you pointed out, to kill it when it's a bad idea. It should be extraordinarily difficult to pass these things. But like the 10th Amendment, the Article 5 is in the Constitution for a reason, too. And I think we do have to be deferential to the framers and to our founding fathers who put that in place. And who knows, maybe the best it is, it's the constitutional equivalent of chicken soup. Won't hurt anything, but it may be the answer that Justice Scalia points to that helps us move forward to a better country. So appreciate your scholarship on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative.
Not the least of which because my son went to the University of Chicago Law School.
Thank you. And it is interesting because just looking at it, that the founders knew that they had passed a document that wasn't perfect, and they knew that it would need amendment as time went on. And I thought it was really interesting in George Washington's farewell address. One of the things he discussed was the fact that, look, you're going to have to amend the Constitution, but when you do it, don't take a shortcut. Don't do it through the Supreme Court. Don't do it through another mechanism. But do it the way that it's set out in the Constitution to be amended. And then the founders put 2 ways in there. One was the way they hoped it would work, I think, which was that the federal government would do that, and they have 27 times. But then they put another backstop in there that said if it does get to where the tail's wagging the dog, because we form the federal government, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. If the federal government will not respond, we're going to give an opportunity for the states, which had formed the federal government, to go through their own amendment process. And so I think this is heavy lifting for each state, and the convention will be super heavy lifting. But I think I'm excited that that the House passed resolutions out last time, and I'm excited that we're going to be looking at them again this next time. So, members, are there any other questions for Andy Oldham? Thanks for being here today on behalf of Governor's Office.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to working with you, Andy. Thank you.
We have one more invited testimony on this today. We have Paul Hudson, who is the Texas co-director of the Convention of States projects. I also want to mention that I had calls from a number of other people asking to testify today, and it was my decision to not let anybody else testify. And it had nothing to do with the subject matter or subject matters, subjects matter, whichever way you would say that. It had nothing to do with the topics or how we should approach this. It was simply the fact that I wanted to limit today, again, to an update, with also allowing some courtesy to the governor's office to speak out on this. And so it was my decision to limit this to one person of invited testimony. But I want to stress again, when session starts, these hearings will be open to everybody, and we look forward to diverse opinions and a lot of discussion on the right way to do Article 5.
Great.
So with that, Paul Hudson, Co-Director, Convention of States. And again, Paul, just for the record, state your name and who you're representing
Absolutely.
today.
My name is Paul Hudson. I am in Burleson in Johnson County. I am the co-director for the Convention of States project here in Texas. It's my privilege to represent Convention of States here in Texas and nearly 92,000 supporters across our state, including, obviously, many of them who are here today.
And that's people who have come on and signed up on your email.
That is absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I think most of them live in my district right now.
Well, I keep running into people who seem to have been reading my testimony ahead of time, and we're actually going to mention that in a little bit. I did want to get through one other procedural thing. For those in the overflow room, if you've got written testimony, the clerk here would be happy to take copies of their written testimony.
Absolutely.
So, well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members, we do thank you for the invitation to bring testimony on behalf of the Convention of States Project. And as has been mentioned, we've been here before, so I'm going to try and keep my remarks as brief as possible. If you had told me in January of 2015 that we would be having a hearing in September of 2016, I would have concluded a couple things. One, we didn't get our resolution passed during the 84th legislative session. But number two, the Convention of States Project got your attention. And that's why we're here today. We're here to, as you said, bring a progress report and understand what our opportunity is in the 85th legislative session. Since session ended in last June, the Convention of States nationally has grown by over 400%, well over 1 million supporters nationwide. We can identify one supporter in every lower house district in the nation. That's an unprecedented and historic achievement. 4 additional states have passed our resolution: Tennessee, Indiana, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, bringing the total number of states to 8 of the required 34. This coming week, the Convention of States will be sponsoring the first ever simulated Article 5 convention in Williamsburg, Virginia. 4 of our own Texas legislators will participate as commissioners. They're going to join fellow state legislators from all 50 states for a movement which is barely 3 years old. Our growth and momentum is historic. Well, as always, in Texas, progress is even more pronounced. When the session ended last June, we had just over 17,000 supporters here. As I mentioned, we're right about at 92,000 Texans. That's a more than 500% increase. Every member on the panel here, even those who are not here today, has seen an increase from Representative Clardy's 270% to Representative Anderson's 430% increase. And you, Chairman King, you're going to be the second in the nation to have 1,000 supporters in your district, and you're going to have to take that up with your fellow Texan, Doug Miller, who just passed that mark last week. Well, those statistics only tell part of the story. In the past 3 months, Texas Convention of States leaders have given more than 100 presentations around the state. From Lubbock and Amarillo in the Panhandle, Denison, Tyler, Beaumont, El Paso, Midland, Odessa, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas-Fort Worth, and even right here in the Capitol. From small gatherings in homes to large venues of 400 or more, Texans are responding to this solution provided by our founders. As has been mentioned by several of you, the calling of an Article 5 convention is a monumental task. It's hard to do. But Texans have never shunned a worthwhile task, no matter the difficulty. We thrive when called upon to defend liberty. Texas leadership exemplifies our opportunity. Representative Rick Miller is once again carrying our legislation this coming session. His commitment to this effort was seen when just 8 days after the passing of his beloved wife Babs, he led our meeting with Governor Abbott's staff here in Austin. Speaking of Governor Abbott, I know Andy mentioned him, his full endorsement of the Convention of States on January 8th ignited even more interest not only in Texas, but around the nation. Governor Abbott is known from his experience as Attorney General and as a judge as a leader willing to take the fight to an overreaching federal government. 15 years ago today, a badly burned Lieutenant Colonel Brian Birdwell, he lay in intensive care at Walter Reed when President George W. Bush paid him a visit. Lieutenant Colonel Birdwell lifted his severely injured arm to return the salute of his commander-in-chief. Today, State Senator Brian Birdwell is rallying his colleagues to use Article 5 to confront, in his words, our belligerent opponent, the federal government. Senator Birdwell joins with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who worked mightily behind the scenes in support of the Convention of States late last session, only to run out of time in the Senate. This session promises to be different, with the Lieutenant Governor's leadership providing us even more momentum as the new session approaches. We know there's no vote today, but we do ask you to remember what we're saying now when the session begins in January. We stand on the edge of history. Earlier in testimony, in the earlier testimony today, Representative Anderson referenced, a lot of other states look to Texas. 49 other state legislatures are looking to you for leadership. And the good news is the House delivered that leadership last session, so we ask you to do the exact same thing. History is going to remember you for this vote on this legislation. Our opportunity couldn't be more clear, and this movement could not be better defined. Before the Miracle on Ice game, Olympic coach Herb Brooks famously told his team, "Great moments are born from great opportunity." We have a great opportunity here, now. It's going to take more than just Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick and Representative Miller and Senator Birdwell. It's going to take more than our friends at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. It's going to take more than just the supporters with the Convention of States Project. It's going to take all of us together in this growing movement. To paraphrase Coach Brooks, and to close, we were made for this time. This is our moment. By the time the legislative session begins in January, you will have over 100,000 Texans ready and eager to support you. The time is now. We ask you to pass our legislation early and with an overwhelming majority. It's time for Texas to lead. Thank you.
Members, any
Questions?
Comments? I'll say this, boss. Some years ago, gosh, I guess it would have been 3 Decembers ago, maybe 4. But we had the Mount Vernon conference, and I went to it, and it was kind of the first exposure I'd ever had to Article 5, and had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns, as any thinking person does as they work through this. And I remember we met and we discussed what it might look like and the rules. It was all very new to me, and we did it at Mount Vernon, by the way, which was kind of cool. And I remember coming back, on my way back, I called my wife Terry on the phone, and I said, I really don't know what to think of today. I'm not sure if I just sat through what someday will have been an historic event, or if I just wasted another Saturday. And I think now that it was the beginning of an historic event. And there were legislators there from about 30 states, I think, and others as well, and it was a really interesting day. But like I said, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of heavy lifting on this, and there are. I would encourage everyone who's working on Article 5, whatever your perspective on this is, to look very much for commonality with others on this. If anything kills legislation, it's when the people that support it are divided. And so there needs to be commonality. I also want to encourage you, even more so, to give the greatest deference and the greatest respect to those who are still trying to work through hard issues on this. Because very smart people who are greatly patriotic and love this country and everything about it can differ in their opinions on this. For me, it was an education process, and it took a long time to work through it till I became very comfortable with it where I am today. If there are other legislators that are not at that point, that does not mean they're opposing you or anything else. That just means they're going through the same study and work process that you did and that I did. Again, the legislature doesn't have any commitment to any one particular process to do this, but my strong encouragement to y'all is to look for commonality between the different groups, the different thoughts on how to do this, and to try to really do a lot of that team building before session, and to the greatest extent possible come here as unified as possible. And I think that what you'll find from the legislature, I firmly believe from everybody on every side of this, is that you'll find people that are very open to listen and to work with you and to talk about this and to try to figure out, because we do want what's best for our state, and that means that we got to have what's best for our country. So with that, Chairman Parker, did I see you push a button?
No, I just closing, but I just want to, again, thank you for your leadership, Chairman King, on the issue. I want to thank you, Paul, for being here. I want to thank everyone for participating and spending a day with us here at the Capitol. And I simply echo Chairman King's comments about the magnitude of this issue, the seriousness of it, and I can assure you that our fellow colleagues will take it very, very seriously in this committee as well as in the body as a whole going forward.
We certainly appreciate that.
We appreciate your commitment. And again, Phil, you said it right. It warms our heart to see so many Texans passionate about the future of our state and our nation. We understand the challenging times that we're facing, and I think we're united as a country in that regard. And so let's hope we can continue to persevere in the battles ahead. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, once again, I want to thank the members of the State and Federal Power and Responsibility Committee, all the witnesses, and all the interested parties who came today. And Vice Chairman Workman, would you like to add anything? Do you?
Well, I'll add my thanks to everyone that's here, and as I think most of you know, I support all of the different efforts that have to do with Article 5. We'll continue to push those hard and try to get those through both houses this next session. Thank you.
Well, members, are there any other matters we need to discuss before we adjourn? Okay. Chair hears none. The Select Committee on State and Federal Power and Responsibility stands adjourned, subject to the call of the chair. Thank you.